Welcome. Scott here. Here is a quick boss guide for the upcoming intersecting wills for Vayne, Steps Severe. The synergy units for the event are the returning Vayne, Leon, Cyan, and Yuri. The featured units will be getting their force enhancement boards unlocked. Vayne FR will be making its debut. Both Vayne and Leon will be getting their C90 awakening and reworks. We will be fighting Golbez Ardyn. Both bosses have 90 million HP each. They don't have any major resistances. The turn requirement is 80. The HP requirements is 8000. Before I continue further, here is a small disclaimer clause for the video. The guide is written based on the time that the event was released for the Japanese version. Please do note that it is possible that the boss fight mechanics might differ when the actual event is released in global. As we are no longer have Lufania Plus fights, the boss guide will be focused primarily on Shinryu fights. In Shinryu, you need to understand the effects gained by the boss as the force gauge build up, its force ability and its force time effect. As your party has low force levels at the start of the era, it is highly certain that the boss force gauge will build up faster than yours. To have a better understanding on the basics of the force gauge mechanics and Shinryu fights, I have done a video explaining the mechanics. I have included the link to the video under the comments and video description for your quick reference. For this fight, the boss force gauge is broken into two thresholds. When the boss gauge is more or equal to 20%, the boss party will gain a post-turn brave Regen that equates to 110% of their initial brave. When the boss gauge is more or equal to 40%, the boss party will double their turn rate. The boss force gauge will build up faster as its HP is lowered. You can refer to the table on the screen for the percentages. Overall, this fight isn't really a dangerous one or toxic as the infamous Dimensions Transcendence Tier 10 fight. Both bosses have a standard moveset. Breaking them is crucial. You need to break Ardyn as soon as possible once he uses Aura of Darkness. At the 100% threshold, Ardyn will use his force ability, Rising Phantom Plus, and activates its force time for 8 turns. The boss force ability, Rising Phantom Plus, will result Ardyn reset his own break status, cleanses all the debuffs on himself, reset your party break status, followed by an AoE Brave plus HP attack. Upon using the force ability, the boss will enter into its force time where the gauge will start to emit a red hue with a counter of 8 on its gauge. When the force time is activated, the bosses will gain an enhancement that prevents them from getting KO. Their HP will remain at 1 if you have killed them. Generally, the boss become unkillable during force time, but you can still do damage to them. If Ardyn is killed, Golbez will just activate the force time without any force ability attack. To freeze the enemy's force time, you need to use a melee force ability. Force abilities that fulfill this condition are Vayne, Camlanod, Desh, Reno, Gavranth and Ursula. Now let's proceed with some party setup recommendations. Recommended calls abilities. To ensure that you are able to constantly break them, it is important to inflict defense down debuffs. Example of calls abilities that inflict defense down calls are Ferris, Titus, Jack, and Vanille. To speed up the fight, using HP damage up debuff calls like Karasame, Seymour, Fran, Ignis, Lily-Set, Maria, and Dark Knight Cecil are useful. Although a bit trickier to use, Aura type HP damage up calls like Kamari, Alisai, Priyash, Leo and Locke are also viable. Most recently C90 units have Aura type HP damage up bonuses. You can use Dissidia DB Call Finder to find out more. Most of the runs feature boss no turns. However, in the event if you let the boss trigger the force ability, you need to find means to counter it. Buff-based damage mitigation will work better against Ardyn's force ability as he will cleanses all debuffs before he unleashes the force ability. Examples are Warrior of Light and 9. Regen and Reno LDCA are great counters against the boss HP attacks. Hope's Shell and Protect buffs from his call are great for reduce the brave damage received. As the force ability isn't a guaranteed hit attack, Redia LDCA also works here. Next, I will be covering units that will be useful to handle the fight mechanics. For any endgame fights like Lufania and Shinryu, it is always recommended to bring supports for their aura and buffs. You can consider bringing Selphie, Lena, Yuri, Yuna, Garnet, Lunafreya, Charlotta, and Ramza. Selphie can make your party hit hard with her guaranteed launch debuff, while Lena can ensure your party is always safe with her powerful HP Regen buffs. Both Lena and Selphie are top-notch budget supports. Selphie and Lena offer debuff evasion protection, while Yuna can cleanse debuffs with her Yuna, which will work well against Golbez blinding cold paralysis triggers. It is advisable to bring a damage mitigator if you doing a hit and counter run. You can consider Beatrix, Snow, Warrior of Light, Zack, Core, Leela, Edge, Orin, Golov, and Gladiolus. Counter tanks like Orin, Golov and Gladiolus works perfectly for this fight, as they will prevent Ardyn from setting up his aura of darkness with their counters. Evasion tanks like Leela, Golov, or Edge also works wonders here, as the fight doesn't feature any guaranteed hit attacks. In addition to the support and tanks, you can bring the following units if you have them. To make the fight easier, you need to dispel Aura of Darkness by breaking Ardyn or dispel the buff. Dispellers like Arsila, Yuffie, Cyan, Cloud, Bald here, and Sid Reigns works well for this fight. Arsila can shut down the boss with her HP silence debuff. You can also bring Aldnark if you have him built up. Bald here, Reigns, and Yuffie have debuff cleansing utility. Ardyn's damage will become potent if he lands a break on your target. Hence units that prevent breaks work wonderfully here. You can bring Ursula, Yang, Core, or Alphanaut for this. As mentioned earlier, you can also inflict break to dispel the boss buff. Noel and Chaos are rebreaker units. With Chaos BT aura active, Ardyn will have a hard time in setting up his aura of darkness buff. In addition to the commonly used FR like Lunafreya and Titus FR, optimal FR that halt the boss force time to use for this fight are Vayne, Gabrinth, Ursula and Camlanaut. Vayne, the featured FR, has pretty easy to fulfill conditions. You just need to break the bosses and use melee attacks. Deploy a melee-oriented them if you are intending to use Vayne's FR. Off-turn melee triggers like melee-based traps, counters, follow-up attacks work well with his FR. Vayne BT Aura will trigger off-turn attacks as long as you break a target. Like Vayne, Gabrinth FR has pretty easy fulfill conditions as well. You just need to inflict break or attack a debuff targets. His debuff counters helps a lot against the warping Ardyn, and his BT Aura offers decent party mitigation. Ursula, one of the best auxiliary FR in the game, offers break immunity, and her FR condition is pretty easy to fulfill for this fight, as there is no Brave Gain nullification or Brave Gain restriction effects. Pair it with a supercharger strategy and you can easily unleash a nuke attack with her. If you fulfill the 3 conditions of Ice, Disable and Launch, you can nuke the boss down fast before it could pose any threat with Camlanaut FR. It is noted that Ardyn has slightly higher resistance to launch. So swap to Golbez when he is not launchable. As Shinryu is about building up your force gauge chargers are great to deploy here. Characteristics of force charger are the unit have substantial amount of instant turn non-attacking abilities. At max force enhancement level 30, one such instant turn ability can supercharge the force gauge by a whopping 50%. You can easily amplify your force time damage by abusing the supercharging mechanics. Examples of such force gauge chargers units are Pernello, Kryl, Charlotta, Braska, Ignis and Lunafreya. For other recommendations, you can consider the following. For tanks, you can bring Warrior of Light, Orin, Gladiolus, and Leon. Warrior of Light can protect the party with his shields. Orin and Gladiolus are top-notch counter tanks. With their counters, you can totally negate Ardyn's Aura of Darkness mechanic. Leon, the other C90 awakening unit for this event, has gotten significant upgrades and he will result the party to absorb the boss's attacks to fill your party brave instead with his Dark Brave damage absorption mechanics. Do watch out for Golbez Blinding Cold, as that is the only non-dark elemental attack in the fight. You can bring the standard damage nuker units like Machina, Titus, Terra, Cloud of Darkness or Jet and nuke the boss with a FR powered burst phase before they could activate their force time. Titus, Cloud of Darkness and Jet have rebreak utility in their kit, which works wonders to dispel the boss's aura buffs. Although their FR are magical, both Iroha and Yuri offer great brave mechanics and auras to complement your party. Iroha's brave consumption reduction prevent your party from exposed to unnecessary breaks, and her FR offers the highest damage potential for supercharging strategy at the moment. Yuri, the BT synergy unit, can break the boss easily with his gravity shaving and traps triggers. He offers great burst healing with his EX and offering the game's most powerful HP Regen aura at 30%. His BT aura will inflict 100% blind rate on the bosses, and it work well here since none of the boss's attacks are guaranteed hit. If you bring a hit and counter setup, Reno and Dash FR works well here. Reno Pyramid debuff can negate debuffs from Golbez Blinding Cold. If you have Aldnark built, he will shut down the boss mechanics with his terror locking mechanics. On the screen, you will see a timeline showing the HP thresholds triggers that you need to watch out for. Like Lufania, SHINRYU fights also features aura boosts for the boss when their HP are depleted to a certain threshold. The stats boosts are triggered at the start of the fight and 79%. Like other SHINRYU fights, the enemy's force gauge will charge faster as their HP depletes. As the enemy's force gauge reaches 20% and above, the boss party will gain a post-turn Regen aura. When the gauge reaches to 40% and above, the boss party double their turn rate. When the force gauge reaches 100%, Ardyn will use its force ability. Rising Phantom Plus will result Ardyn reset his own break status, cleanses all the debuffs on himself, reset your party break status, followed by an AoE Brave plus HP attack and activate the force time for 8 turns. While the force time is active, the boss party will become immortal and cannot be killed. You can still do damage to them. If Ardyn is dead, Golbez will just activate the force time without any force ability attack. At the start of the fight, Golbez will activate Black Wave, which grants Dark Enchant and Imperil for their party along with a massive Brave gain. Ardyn will use Aura of Darkness and grants himself 2 buffs. When Aura of Darkness is active, once your party act, Ardyn will warp his turn forward. His attacks will have a follow-up HP attack. So, it is your best interest to remove the buff as soon as possible once he grants that buff to himself. You can remove the buff by either breaking them or using a dispel ability. At the 79% HP threshold, Golbez will activate another Black Wave. At the 59% and 19% HP threshold, Golbez will activate a Blinding Cold Brave attack that will inflict paralysis on a random target. You can evade it or negate it with debuff evasion or dodge the attack with evasion. Other than the threshold triggers, the bosses have a standard attack rotation cycle, which I will cover in the later slides. Bringing counter tanks like Orin, Glove, and Gladiolus will make the fight a cakewalk, as they will prevent Ardyn from setting his Aura of Darkness buff. As none of the boss's attacks are guaranteed hit, you can use party evasion units like Leela, Redia, or Edge to dodge their attacks, or have Yuri activate his BT aura if you have his BT. Now let's proceed with the boss mechanics proper. Similar to any Lufania fights, for SHINRYU fights, the boss will also gain stats boosts and Brave gain reduction auras when you deplete the boss's HP to a certain threshold. However, SHINRYU bosses will also gain HP damage reduction auras as well. The threshold's trigger for this fight is at the start of the fight and 79% HP threshold. At the start of the fight, it will boost its defense stats by 200%. It will raise its Brave damage and Brave gain reduction auras to 80%. It will also reduce your HP damage dealt by 50%. At 79% HP threshold, it will further boost its defense stats to 300% and the HP damage dealt reduction auras to 80%. To handle the defense stats boost, you can inflict defense down calls. To handle the Brave gain reductions, you can bring a Brave gain up support like Agrias, Ram, or Quistis. With the recent units released, you shouldn't have any problem in handling the Brave gain or damage reduction auras. For HP damage reduction auras, HP damage up calls will only partly offset against the reductions. However, you can easily overwrite them with your party force time. As we progress through the era, we will gain access to units with FR that allows you to build up your force time HP damage bonuses up to 999%. Learning on how to take full advantage of the damage window in Shinryu fight holds the key on how to make Shinryu fights easier. Now, I will be covering the boss key mechanics in detail. Firstly, let's cover on Ardyn, who is the more dangerous one of the two bosses for this fight. Ardyn will use Aura of Darkness, an AoE Brave plus HP at the start of the fight. He will grant himself 2 buffs, Aura of Darkness a buff without turn limit along with Shadow Step buff for 8 turns. Shadow Step buff grants Ardyn an instant turn upon him breaking a target. It also raises his attack and max Brave by 40%. Break immunity, evasion, or shields buff work well to handle against this mechanics. You can also dispel the buff with the Dispel ability. Aura of Darkness is the more dangerous buff. While it is active, it will grant Ardyn the following. 1. Ardyn will warp his turn forward after any of your character acts. 2. All the attacks in Ardyn's rotation will trigger a follow-up Brave plus HP attack. Thus, hereby making all his attacks in the rotations trigger a HP attack. To negate this, you can either break Ardyn or dispel his buff with the Dispel ability. Counter tanks will totally negate this, as Ardyn will always expose himself to breaks after he attacks. His damage rotation features a 3-skill rotation. Do note that the rotation on the screen shows with his Aura of Darkness buff inactive. On his first skill use, he will just unleash a Brave attack. On his second skill use, he will use Warp Strike, a single target melee Brave plus HP attack. If he breaks the target, will he gain Brave that equates to 20% of his max Brave. On his third skill use, he will use Aura of Darkness, which I have mentioned earlier. Now, let's move on to his partner in crime, Golbez. Golbez will use Dark Wave at the start of the fight. He will gain 60% of his max Brave along with a buff called Dark Wave without turn limits. While Dark Wave, it will grant both him and Ardyn, Dark Enchant and Imperil. In other words, they will hit harder with the elemental weakness damage boost. You can remove this buff by either breaking Golbez or dispel it. Golbez will repeat the use of Dark Wave at 79% HP threshold. At the 59% and 19% HP threshold, Golbez will also use Blinding Cold, an ice elemental Brave attack counter trigger that inflicts a 1-turn paralysis on a random target. If you trigger the threshold while in summon or burst phase, Golbez will follow up with the counter once you have exited from the phase. You can negate this with evasion or debuff evasion. If you got the paralysis triggered, you can cleanse it with debuff cleansing skills or override it with buffs. Like Ardyn, Golbez also has a 3-skill rotation. For the first skill use, he will use Rising Wave, a double single target Dark Elemental Magic Brave attack. For the second skill use, he will use Glare Hand, a double AoE Dark Elemental Magic Brave attack. For the last skill in the rotation, he will use Twin Meteor, a single target Dark Elemental Brave plus HP attack. I have come to the last slide of the guide. By now, you should have a FR. Generally, you just charge up your force gauge. Have the FR unit activate their force time with their force ability. Prepare for a big damage phase either through a unit burst phase or supercharge the gauge with Kane's follow-up. To build up the bonuses efficiently, you need bring a force gauge charger. Examples are Pernello, Kryl, Ignis, Charlotta, Braska and Lunafreya. At force level 30, this units can boost the force charge with 50% with their instant turn, non-attacking ability on top of the force time conditions. If you bring Kane or using Kane BT friend as support, have him activate his BT aura and let him stay in the air firing the lancets while your force gauge charger is spamming his or her instant turns. If you have Camlanot fully built with FR and BT, you can abuse his powerful FR mechanics by fulfilling 3 of the following conditions. 1. Constant launches. Selfie LD debuff, Kai's hero support or Sid Rain's LDCA on your burst unit. 2. Ice enchant. You can use Kurasame LDCA for party ice enchant or bring an ice enchanter like Celis, Onion Knight, or Kurasame himself. Snow also offers party-wide ice enchant with his BT aura. 3. Make sure you inflict a turn disable debuff on the boss. Camlanot BT is the easiest to set up. You can go through a setup process for this as well. When all conditions are met, the party can meet 80% HP damage bonus with a full party launch. We also have Luna Freya available where she will make setting up the FR phase easier. She works wonderfully well even you just use her as a LDCA. Now let's recap on the boss key mechanics. Ardyn will use Aura of Darkness at the start of the fight. You need to break him to prevent him to warp. He will have a follow-up Brave plus HP attack if the buff isn't dispelled. Bring a counter tank like Orin, Glove, or Gladiolus will auto-dispel the buff upon the tank triggering their counters. Golbez will buff the party with Black Wave at start of the fight and 79% HP threshold. You can remove the buff by breaking Golbez. Golbez will use Blinding Cold at 59% and 19% HP threshold at a random target, which will inflict paralyze for 1 turn. You can block with debuff evasion or dodge the attack. Once they activate the force time, you need to use melee FR to halt it or you have to wait it to lapse. The force time lasts for 8 turns. Now I will make a quick overview on the FR of the featured unit, Vayne. Vayne has a pretty decent FR ability. You need to have him green if you want to make full use of his FR HP damage bonuses. The first 2 conditions are simple. You just need your party to deal melee damage. Off-turn attacks like traps, counters and follow-up also work. Fulfill this will uptick the condition by 5%. Example of melee trap triggers is Sysis traps. For melee-based follow-up, his partner is Yang and Core at the moment. Vayne also activates follow-up with his BT aura as long as you trigger a break. Core will be getting his C90 awakenings and rework in the coming banner. Compared to other members, upon fulfilling this condition, Vayne will uptick the force time by 20%. The last condition is to inflict break. Rebreaker units or units that offers instant or guaranteed breaks are great partners for this FR. In addition to Vayne, you can consider Titus, Gabrinth, Noel, Chaos, and Jet. You can also make trigger breaks easier with Sephiroth BT aura. With this, I have come to the end of my boss guide presentation. Hopefully you find it useful. If you like the video, please give a like. Please subscribe to my channel for future gaming content. Good luck for the fight tomorrow. Bye.